There's a type of silence that makes people nervous, not the silence of anger, not the silence of sadness, but the silence that comes when a man simply stops filling the space with words. No explanations, no justifications, no emotional updates, just quiet presence. And for some reason, that kind of silence makes the world uncomfortable. People start asking questions. Are you okay? What's wrong? Why are you being so distant? Even when nothing is actually wrong. Even when he's more at peace than he's been in years. Today, we're going to talk about why men go quiet, what it really means, and why that silence triggers such strong reactions in others. If you've ever been accused of shutting down when you were actually just done talking, hit that like button. Subscribe, because we're diving into the psychology behind male silence and why it's so misunderstood. Let's begin. Men don't go quiet overnight. It's not a switch that flips. It's more like a dam that's been cracking for years, until one day it just stops holding back the flood of words. Here's what happens before the silence. A man spends years trying to communicate. He explains his feelings. He clarifies his intentions. He tries to make himself understood. He chooses his words carefully. He stays calm during difficult conversations. He tries to bridge the gap between what he means and what others hear. And yet, somehow, nothing changes. The same misunderstandings repeat. The same accusations resurface. His words get twisted. His intentions get questioned. His explanations get used as ammunition. So he explains more. He uses different words. He tries different approaches. He reads articles about communication. He asks what he can do better. He genuinely tries. And still, nothing changes. That's when something inside him shifts. Not dramatically, not angrily, just quietly. He realizes that the problem isn't his communication. The problem is that some people don't want to understand. They want to interpret. They want to control. They want him to keep explaining until his words fit their narrative. My friend Alex went through this. He's one of the most articulate people I know. He can explain complex ideas in simple terms. But in his last relationship, no matter how clearly he spoke, his girlfriend would always find a way to misinterpret him. He'd say, "I need some time alone today." And she'd hear, "I don't want to be with you." He'd say, "I'm tired from work," and she'd hear, "You're too demanding." He'd say, "I'm not upset," and she'd hear, "You did something wrong." After months of this, Alex stopped explaining. Not because he stopped caring, but because he realized his explanations were being used to create problems, not solve them. And that's when people started calling him distant. This is what most people don't understand about male silence. It's not a withdrawal. It's a boundary. It's not coldness. It's conservation. It's not checking out. It's choosing where to invest energy. Think of it like this. Imagine you're trying to water a garden, but the hose has holes in it. The water is leaking everywhere except where you're trying to direct it. At some point, you stop fighting the hose. You find a different way to water the garden. That's what happens when a man goes quiet. He's not giving up on communication. He's just done wasting energy on conversations that go nowhere. When a man goes quiet, the first thing he notices is how much energy he gets back. For years, he's been running an internal program that constantly monitors his words. Before he speaks, he's already thinking, how will this be interpreted? Will this start an argument? Do I need to soften this? Should I explain more? That program runs in the background of every conversation, burning energy he didn't even know he was spending. When he goes quiet, that program shuts off, and suddenly he has bandwidth for other things. His mind clears. He sleeps better. He feels less anxious. He's more present in his own life because he's not constantly replaying conversations or preparing for the next one. But here's what's interesting. He doesn't become less functional. He often becomes more productive. Without the mental drain of constant explanation, he focuses better at work. He gets more done. He's more decisive. He stops second-guessing himself. His relationships don't all fall apart. Some do. But others actually get stronger. Because the people who truly care about him adjust. They learn to listen to his actions instead of demanding constant verbal updates. I watched this happen with my brother. He used to be the family peacemaker, always explaining himself, mediating conflicts, making sure everyone was okay. It exhausted him. Then he just stopped. He still showed up for family events. He was still kind. He just stopped doing emotional labor for people who never reciprocated. Some family members said he changed. Others said he became cold. But the people who actually paid attention noticed something different. He was calmer, more centered, less stressed. What people interpreted as distance was actually just him taking up less space in conversations. And that space revealed something important. How much emotional work he'd been doing that nobody else was willing to do. When a man goes quiet, he's not abandoning his responsibilities. He's just no longer taking responsibility for other people's feelings, interpretations, and expectations. He's done being the translator of his own existence. Here's the uncomfortable truth. When a man goes quiet, it threatens a power dynamic that most people don't even realize exists. Think about it. When someone is constantly explaining themselves, they're in a subordinate position. They're seeking approval, validation, permission to be who they are. The person listening holds the power. They get to judge whether the explanation's good enough. They get to decide if they accept it or not. They control whether the conversation ends or continues. But when a man stops explaining, that power structure collapses. He's no longer asking for approval. He's no longer seeking validation. He's simply existing as he is, and you can take it or leave it. That shift is deeply unsettling for people who are benefiting from the old dynamic. My friend Sarah dated a guy who went quiet on her. She admitted to me later, it wasn't that he stopped talking to me. He still talked, but he stopped defending himself, and that drove me crazy. I asked her why it bothered her so much. She thought about it and said, because I couldn't get a reaction anymore. I'd bring up something that used to start a whole discussion, and he'd just say okay, or I see what you mean, and move on. It felt like he stopped caring about what I thought. But that wasn't it. He still cared. He just stopped giving her the power to define him through her interpretations. This is why male silence triggers such strong reactions. It's not the absence of words that bothers people. It's the absence of access. When a man stops explaining, people lose the ability to steer his thoughts through questioning, test his boundaries through emotional appeals, control the narrative of who he is, extract reassurance on demand, and that loss of access feels threatening, even to good people, even to people who love him. Because we live in a culture that treats men's silence as something to be fixed, interrogated, or broken through, not as something to be respected. Here's where most people get it wrong. They assume that when a man goes quiet, he's shutting down emotionally, that he's disconnecting, that something is broken inside him. But that's not what's happening at all. What's actually happening is that he's tuning in to himself. For years, he's been externally focused, monitoring other people's reactions, adjusting his behavior based on feedback, living in response to the world around him. When he goes quiet, he shifts from external focus to internal focus. He starts asking different questions. Not what do they think of me, but what do I actually think? Not how should I respond, but do I need to respond at all? Not how can I fix this, but is this mine to fix? This internal focus looks like detachment from the outside, but from the inside, it's the opposite. It's engagement with reality instead of performance. Let me give you an example. My friend Tom used to be incredibly reactive. If someone misunderstood him, he'd immediately jump to clarify. If someone was upset with him, he'd immediately try to fix it. Then he went through a period where he just stopped doing that. People said he became emotionally unavailable. But Tom told me, I didn't become unavailable. I became available to myself for the first time in years. Instead of constantly managing other people's perceptions of me, I started actually living my life. He still had emotions, he still cared about people, but he stopped letting other people's interpretations dictate his emotional state. Someone thought he was angry. That was their interpretation. He knew he wasn't. Someone thought he was distant. That was their feeling. He knew he was present. Someone thought he changed. They were right, but not in the way they thought. This is the difference between shutting down and tuning in. Shutting down is avoiding emotions. Tuning in is choosing which emotions deserve your energy. Shutting down is running from discomfort. Tuning in is sitting with discomfort without needing to explain it away. Shutting down is disconnection. Tuning in is selective connection. And once you understand that difference, male silence stops looking like a problem and starts looking like wisdom. When a man goes quiet, he doesn't lose connection. He loses noise, and what remains is actually quite powerful. First, he gains clarity. Without the constant chatter of explanation and justification, his thoughts settle. He can see situations more clearly. He can make decisions faster. He trusts his instincts more. Think of it like water in a glass. When you keep stirring it, everything is murky. But when you let it sit still, the sediment settles and the water becomes clear. That's what happens in a quiet man's mind. The constant stirring stops and clarity emerges. Second, he gains respect. Not from everyone, but from the people who matter. People who need constant explanation respect you less over time, because explanation signals insecurity. It signals that you need their approval to feel valid. But people who value character respect you more when you stop over-explaining, because quiet consistency is more trustworthy than loud reassurance. I know a man named James who runs a successful business. He told me, "The moment I stopped explaining my decisions to every person who questioned them, I noticed my team respected me more, not less. They stopped treating my decisions like suggestions and started executing them as directives." Third, he gains peace. Real peace. Not the fake peace of avoiding conflict, but the deep peace of accepting that not everyone needs to understand you. Most men spend years chasing being understood. They think if they just explain themselves better, clearer, more thoroughly, people will finally get it. But the quiet man realizes some people will never understand, and that's okay. Their understanding isn't required for him to live authentically. That realization is incredibly freeing. Fourth, he gains energy, mountains of it. Energy he didn't even know he was spending on managing perceptions, defending himself, and trying to control how others see him. That energy gets redirected into things that actually matter: his work, his health, his hobbies, real relationships with people who don't need him to constantly prove himself. And fifth, he gains discernment. He starts seeing people more clearly. When you stop explaining yourself, you see who actually listens, who respects boundaries, who can handle silence without filling it with anxiety. The quiet man isn't testing people on purpose, but his silence naturally filters his relationships. Some people can't handle it and leave. Others lean in and actually start seeing him for the first time. This isn't loss, it's refinement. It's the difference between having 100 shallow connections and 10 deep ones. Not everyone is scared of male silence. Some people appreciate it, respect it, even find it refreshing. But the people who are terrified of it, They're usually terrified for a very specific reason. They were depending on his words to maintain control. Let me break this down. When a man constantly explains himself, he gives people material to work with. They can pick apart his words, question his motives, redirect his thoughts, keep him engaged in endless loops of clarification. But when he goes quiet, that material disappears, and people who relied on it suddenly feel powerless. That's why you'll hear things like, "You're not communicating with me," translation. "I can't control the narrative anymore. You've changed." Translation, "You're not performing for me anymore. You're emotionally unavailable." Translation, "I don't have access to your inner world anymore." These aren't concerns about his well-being. They're complaints about loss of control. Now, I'm not saying everyone who uses these phrases has malicious intent. Sometimes people genuinely don't understand what's happening. They're worried, they care, but intent doesn't change impact. And the impact of constantly demanding explanation from someone who's choosing silence is pressure. Pressure to go back to the old dynamic where they were externally managed instead of internally grounded. My friend Daniel experienced this. After he went quiet, his ex kept texting him. Long messages asking if he was okay, if she did something wrong, if he was angry, if they could talk. He wasn't angry. He was just done. Done explaining, done reassuring, done being responsible for her emotional stability. But his silence made her so uncomfortable that she labelled him as emotionally abusive for giving her the silent treatment. He wasn't giving anyone the silent treatment. He was simply no longer engaging in a dynamic that drained him. But to her, his silence felt like punishment, because she'd become dependent on his explanations to feel secure. This is why the wrong people are terrified of male silence, not because they care about his communication, but because they need his constant engagement to feel in control. The right people, they give him space. They trust his consistency. They understand that silence doesn't mean absence. And that's the beautiful filter that silence creates. It reveals who's actually here for him versus who's here for what they can extract from him. Let me tell you what happens when a man fully embraces his quiet. He doesn't become a hermit. He doesn't cut everyone off. He doesn't stop loving people. He just stops performing emotions to prove he feels them. He stops explaining boundaries to people who will test them anyway. He stops translating his existence into language others might accept. And something remarkable happens. The noise in his life decreases, but the signal gets stronger. His yes means yes. His no means no. His presence is genuine. His absence is honest. He's not playing games. He's not being manipulative. He's just done wasting words on people who weren't really listening anyway. And you know what? The people who matter stick around because they never needed the constant commentary. They trusted the consistency. If you're a man who's gone quiet or thinking about it, understand this. You're not broken. You're not cold. You're not failing at relationships. You're just done explaining yourself to people who were never planning to understand you anyway. And that's not detachment. That's discernment. If this resonated, hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear that. Their silence is valid. Subscribe for more real talk about the psychology behind behaviour that society misunderstands. Your silence isn't the problem. The discomfort others feel with it, that's information. I'll see you in the next one.